I tend to think Hooft trains people in 3 specific tiers. Like henchmen, lieutenants, and evil masterminds.
I love thinking of
Usman definitely like an evil mastermind tier.
Anthony Johnson, of course, the king of the henchmen.
Yeah, exactly. He's not a lieutenant. He's not like Usman is the equivalent of like, you know, Mad Dog in the Raid or something like that. Guys like Usman and Burns. They're not unbreakable, but like Usman would send them out to like handle his business for him. Whereas a lot of the rest of the, I just like to think that Henry Hooft trains people in this specific way. Just like, guys, most of you, you're gonna be fucking cannon fodder. I'm gonna sugarcoat it. Hero's gonna tear through you. He's gonna get to Usman. He's going to have significant trouble with him, but eventually he'll find the flaw, and then he'll have to have his final boss fight against Usman.
I love the image of Henry Hooft screaming, "Don't give up," at just a wall of monitors. watching his henchmen being picked off by machine gun fire. But in a way, he needs to feel powerful, so he does train them to fail him. You know, without that, he wouldn't be better than them.
Yep.
I really like that premise. Hello and welcome to another edition of Heavy Hands, your post-UFC 245 edition. In fact, I am your host, Connor Rebush. With me, as always, is Phil McKenzie. And you know what? Last week's episode felt so good, Phil. I'm now going to shower you with a bevy of compliments. Smart. Funny. Nice. Hot.
I'm overwhelmed.
English.
I think we should start.
I think I did that last week, too.
I don't know if that's a compliment anymore.
I don't think it's been a compliment for a while, but I don't mind. I take you as you are.
Yeah, so we just watched UFC 245, and it was pretty damn good. Lots to talk about, lots of interesting stuff to say.
And lots of stuff. This bears saying at the top of the show, and should come as no surprise to even our most loyal and complimentary listeners. Lots of stuff we were catastrophically wrong about. Although not catastrophically to the point that like, or in the sense of I don't like the way it played out. You know, some of these catastrophically mistaken claims and predictions of ours still resulted in some very fun and very satisfying fights. And on that note, why don't we I'm getting ahead of myself. We are going to be doing our standard, just sort of running in reverse chronological order from the main event down through all of the most interesting stuff from UFC 245. This seems like one of those occasions where we are likely to get caught talking about something for way too long, so do not be surprised if there ends up being a bonus episode on the Heavy Hands Patreon this week of the sort of offcuts, things that don't make the main show. But I say this because in addition to UFC 245, we have a sort of middling card coming up next week, but one with some really, really fascinating matchups on it. Namely, we are going to do our best to get to the co-main and main event of that card. The main event, Frankie Edgar versus the Korean Zombie, Chansung Jung, and the co-main event, Volkanovski versus the other light heavyweight contender who I can't really wrap my head around just yet, Alexander Rakic. So that is coming at the end of the show. But as I was saying, back to my original segue, Kamaru Usman versus Colby Covington. I can't recall specifically how many times I brought up the idea of grappler versus grappler and wrestler versus wrestler matchups resulting in a kickboxing fight. I brought that up so many times just to specifically say I didn't think this would be one of those. Wrestling expert Ed Gallo agreed with me. And it was 5 rounds of kickboxing. It was shockingly good kickboxing. It was not just fun to watch because of its atrocious messiness, which is often the case, as, for example, when Colby Covington and Damian Maia fought. it was a genuinely interesting, compelling fight with lots of action, lots of adjustments, some moments of serious drama, and it ended with Colby Covington getting knocked the fuck out. So I really can't complain. But, yeah, I expected there to be wrestling. And Phil, I believe I recall you saying that the way for Colby Covington to win this fight would be to stick Kamaru Usman in a striking-only matchup. And that wasn't the case. I think we were probably both really impressed with Kamaru Usman's striking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as we were saying before the show, I don't think Kamaru Usman is still an entirely comfortable striker, but he is an exceptionally well-coached one. And that is increasingly coming out in his fights. He is looking better and better on the feet. He still has moments where he will just suddenly freeze up, and we'll touch on those a bit later. Mm-hmm. But this was a exceptionally illustrative performance of how to deal with a wild volume striker using fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. I think we have mentioned more than once before that Kamaru Usman seems to have the sort of mentality that makes him one of the few people on Team Evil who is actually perfectly suited to having Henry Hooft as his cornerman. Like, he's in no danger of quitting at any moment, so he doesn't need someone to remind him that quitting is an option like Henry Hooft loves to do. Instead, he just gets the genuinely brilliant and insightful tactical advice that Henry Hooft has always given from the corner. And I think that was a major factor throughout this fight. Like, I don't know how differently this would have played out without Hooft, but Usman, he was following Hooft's instructions and making adjustments at his cue a lot.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people have lauded Covington's toughness since this fight, but you have to give a lot of credit to Usman as well, because he got either hurt or shocked multiple times in the fight, and it was in an area which I don't think is his favorite area to fight in, and he had Henry Hooft in his corner, and all of those things are things which sap the will to win of anyone, and he looked completely invincible, like mentally, like unbreakable throughout this fight.
Yep, body language never changing, facial expression never changing. So let's talk about those moments. I think that's a kind of a good way to understand the dynamic of this matchup. And then maybe later, before we break away from this, we can touch on would it have been a good idea for Usman to wrestle or not? To me, that was one of the most interesting things about this fight as it played out, was Usman's tendency to sort of get frozen in front of Covington. It happened a good bit in the first round. It happened less and less after Usman found that body shot, and I don't think those two things are merely correlated. Covington's volume dropped significantly after round 2. In round 3, it was the lowest of the fight. He tried to push it in rounds 4 and 5, but never again reached the crazy output he had in round 1. Usman basically matched or out-threw him in terms of volume every round after round 2. And, there were these moments where Covington, Ed Gallo talked about this, about Covington's wrestling game. It's the same as his striking game. He is a pace fighter. Like that's the backbone of his style of fighting, is to just drown you in output. Doesn't care particularly so much about the individual techniques, although as we saw, both as a wrestler and a striker, he does have some ability to make tactical adjustments and play one technique off of another. But those were the moments where it probably could have gone really, really badly for Kamaru Usman. He would sort of get caught standing in front of Covington, and I think due to the fact that he is such a thoughtful fighter, which makes him a great adjuster, he would sort of, just basically get stuck overthinking. And Covington is not overthinking in those moments. He's thinking, or he's feeling, go, 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 and just pours it on recklessly. And when Covington would really just get reckless and throw a lot, that's when Usman would get caught. What I noticed was that each time that happened, those would often be the moments that would turn the entire momentum of the fight in Colby Covington's favor. You know, in other matchups, he would land those big shots or whatever, and the other person they'd want to break. They would take a step back, and Covington would, like when a dog sees anything running away from it, predator mode flicks on, and he just starts running. And over in this fight, Covington would catch Usman. Usman would sort of stagger or flinch or look uncomfortable. And then several times you could see Covington gearing up to rush after him, and Usman didn't run away. He didn't try to take a step back. He didn't try to reset. He immediately turned off the overthinking and threw like 3, 4, 5 punch counter combinations, knowing that Covington was going to try to come in. As the fight went on, Covington became less and less confident in even being able to chase after Usman. So as the fight went on, he had more moments where he would sting him, and they would very quickly just dissipate. Like once it became clear that Usman was not seriously hurt and was not even considering backing off, Covington didn't try to follow up, even though it did seem on a few occasions that he had hurt Usman. So I think Usman's like mental fortitude deserves serious praise here. His mental fortitude and, as you said, his discipline, just knowing that he has a well put together system of fundamental techniques. He didn't ever worry or fret. He just relied on his techniques, and it was awesome. I loved it.
Yeah, and it was definitely also, it was due to the fact that Covington was constantly having to work out of a deficit. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's controversial to say that. I think there was, like you said, there were moments where he hit Usman, and the crowd went nuts because, as it sounds, they would.
Because hashtag MMA fans.
Yeah, but USA. But he was constantly having to fight to catch up, and I think that is down to Henry Hooft's training, and specifically Usman being trained not necessarily as a good MMA striker, but as a good striker. Period.
Yeah.
Because he discounted one of the typical like maxims of quote unquote MMA striking, which is that open stance matchups are rear hand matchups. Mm-hmm. Because
I'm so glad you brought this up.
Because what Usman was controlling most of the fight with was his lead hand, and I think you mentioned this in the RDA fight. It was a big part of what allowed him to push RDA to the fence when he fought him, was his ability to control space with the jab. And he was just constantly punching over and punching through Covington's lead hand, who looked incredibly uncomfortable. And you saw the difference when Covington occasionally Usman switched stances, and honestly, I'm not sure why.
It's MMA.
He sort of stopped doing it after a bit.
Yeah.
Because you saw what happened to Covington striking when he did that, is that Covington was suddenly realized he could jab. Mm-hmm. And suddenly Covington's volume skyrocketed. It's another reason why I think he had more volume in the earlier rounds. It's because Usman was like, let me try going southpaw. And then Covington was suddenly, for whatever reason, is actually more comfortable in... he's a rare southpaw who is more comfortable in the close stance matchup because he's willing to jab in that position. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it was so much of Usman controlling him with his lead hand, and then either mixing it up with like wonderful attritional work to the body. Because the big right hand to the body, the snap kick to the body. We knew that, everyone knew that Covington's advantage or supposed advantage was in his endurance, and Usman just kind of took that away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to speak just for a second, which in my case usually means 4 or 5 minutes, about what you said there. Covington for some reason wasn't comfortable jabbing in the open stance matchup when he was southpaw and Usman was orthodox. I think, I always go on about how useful a jab is in an open stance fight, because the conventional wisdom is that you get your lead foot outside your opponent's and you throw your rear hand. Which, is conventional wisdom because it works. It absolutely works. I think the idea that people don't want to use their lead hands is a bit of like actual circumstance and a bit of bad education about how to do it. It's different jabbing against a southpaw when you're a right-handed fighter. So I think for Covington, like, he knows that he's in the lane for the cross when he lets his opponent get their lead foot outside of his. That's why he's always moving to his right against an orthodox fighter. And the only way to find a really good, consistent, easy lane for the jab in that stance is to allow them to get their foot outside yours. And I just don't think somebody like Colby Covington is at all comfortable sort of towing that line. Like, I know I'm vulnerable to this weapon here. Like, what is he, if he were to really use his jab in that kind of matchup, what would he do when Covington, or when Usman countered him with the right cross? He doesn't move his head. He doesn't have great retreating footwork. So like a couple times he did step in with a jab. And in fact, I think the shot that supposedly broke Covington's jaw, I haven't actually found confirmation if that actually happened or not.
Yeah, I believe it did.
Okay, so the shot that we believe was the one that broke Covington's jaw in round 3 was very much like Luke Rockhold, Michael Bisping style positioning. He stepped in way too hard on the jab and almost turned his back trying to get away. And instead of going right to the body, left hook over the shoulder, which also worked for Usman on several occasions, he threw the right straight right down the pipe and was just lined up for the counter. Usman, on the other hand, actually had some head movement. He had some evasive footwork. You know, when he would get into that jabbing position, he would get away from the left hand when it did come back at him by moving off to his right, moving outside the left hand rather than trying to get away from it in the very typical anti-southpaw way of moving to your left. So, like, I just think Usman, what we saw is he just has a way more nuanced understanding of how striking works. That doesn't necessarily mean he's always a better striker, because he can get caught, as I said, considering all of those options. But there is a genuine, there's a sort of an art to successfully jabbing against an opposite stance fighter. It doesn't feel the same way as normally jabbing does, where you can just sort of easily move to your left, the most natural, comfortable way to move your feet, and each time you do, the line for the jab opens up. So yeah, I think I get why Usman, or why Covington doesn't use that weapon. I think Usman deserves serious credit for showing that he was able to use that weapon. Thing was, this fight was still very close. And essentially, based on what John Anik said about the scorecards at the end of the broadcast, it came down to that last round. I believe one judge had it 3-1 Covington, which I don't really get. One judge had it 3-1 Usman, which I think is a little more defensible. Although I guess, like in those moments where Usman either looked like he was hurt or really was hurt for a moment, if you weigh that, then I guess I could understand scoring more in Covington's favor. And one judge had it 2-2. So the 5th round was the determining round. Do you think Usman should have wrestled?
This is the thing, is that Usman is undeniably, the bigger, stronger guy, the better technical wrestler. The question in MMA is, how much better do you have to be than someone to actively, beat them in wrestling?
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, if the other guy, if you are trying to wrestle with someone, and all they are doing is trying to stop you from getting takedowns, how much, it's not good enough for you to have 100 in wrestling. If you've got 100 in wrestling and they've got a 90, you're probably going to end up in a stall. We've sort of seen this on several occasions with Damian Maia versus both of these guys and Tyron Woodley, is that if when they fought him and they were almost entirely focused on stopping the takedown, he basically couldn't get one on any of them.
Mm-hmm.
And So the thing is, I think if Usman had decided to wrestle and Covington hadn't, there's a strong chance that he might have just gotten stalemated in the wrestling. Or that if he had gotten successful takedowns, he might have had to spend too much energy on them. More than that, it was that when they were fighting, most of the time it was when their lead legs got tangled, when they ended up getting chest to chest, that Covington, as you said, they just got into these kind of scrambly in close situations that Covington would just close the door with a left hand. Or that, they ended up, for whatever reason, Usman would end up stepping over and ending up at southpaw. Then that Covington would close the door, and that was where he was having all his best success.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they were out at far range, Covington was mostly just getting pieced up.
Yep.
But when they clashed into the middle, so I think that A, there's a chance that Usman would have stalemated himself, and B, that they could have had the situation where he would have gone into the clinch, they would have broken, and Covington would have just unloaded, and that might have repeated itself more often than we saw in this fight. So I'm not necessarily sure that it would have actually been it's weird. Like what we said was that Usman should avoid an open space kickboxing match at all costs. After watching this fight, I was just like, no, maybe this was the best. Maybe this was the best plan. Maybe this was the thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, he executed it extremely well. I can't front him for that. Can't front him for that.
He did say in the post-fight press conference that he was a bit emotionally invested in the idea. Actually, he said he was more emotionally invested than he ever had been in another fight with the idea of knocking Covington out. That's the reason that he struck with him. I think he I don't know. I think he struck with him for sort of ego reasons, which part of me is glad he did. He knocked Covington out, so that was pretty sweet.
I think he struck with it just because he thought he was a shitty striker.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily. I mean, he said that he did it for emotional reasons. That was literally after he just said, "I didn't let emotion get to me at all in this fight because I'm so focused."
He was a little inconsistent there.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a fighter thing to say. To say,
he didn't.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to do this because I wanted to fight him at his own game. I wanted to beat Thiago Santos at kickboxing. It's not because I'm not very good. So yeah, I think he just thought Covington was a shitty kickboxer and he was going to be able to knock him out there. And he was right in the end.
Could be. I want to push back a little bit on the wrestling thing. We're already getting way too long for this segment, but face it, folks, that's what kind of show it's going to be this week. I do think, what does it mean to say that they're going to stalemate in a wrestling position? Does that mean Covington is defending with his back to the fence? Because that's Usman winning. Does it mean that Usman shoots and Covington sprawls on him? Because, I would have loved to see just the occasional shot in open space from Usman. It probably would have made the striking a little easier. That's one of Colby's specific weaknesses as a wrestler, is that he gets zoned into his striking and can get just knocked off his feet by a surprising takedown. Usman does have a strong, quick shot. So what do you mean? What's a wrestling stalemate favoring Colby look like in your mind?
I mean, it's just the fact that Usman's takedowns are typically clinch initiated. He's not a huge shot guy. He doesn't, lower his base and dive in on the legs kind of thing.
He can.
I mean, he can do that. Yeah. But yeah, so a lot of it just would have been him driving his shoulder into Colby. I mean, and again, shot takedowns are relatively risky if you get sprawled on.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just the fact that at all those points when they ended up kind of in the position when they were standing chest to chest, that was when Colby just went absolutely berserk. And he clearly didn't really have any understanding. He clearly couldn't close the distance in any reliable way at all in just the open stance kickboxing match. So it ended up being I think it would have just been accepting maybe slightly unnecessary risk. I mean, there's obviously ways you can build out on that. It's not necessarily just... I mean, I think the whole concept of the round-stealing takedown is one which is obviously a bit stupid, although it was one which the commentary team seemed to love. Obviously, they were big fans of the... DC is a big fan of, like, whoever hit a takedown wins the round.
It did become a thing because at least at one time it worked, you know?
Yeah. But I think another good reason to do late takedowns is that level of risk becomes reduced. So I think that if Usman was going to attempt shot takedowns to mix them up with his striking, then he should have done it like at the end of the first couple of rounds just to see what the waters were like.
Sure. I just think it favors Usman to have more threats as a pressure fighter. You know, like, it has to be said, he was a very successful pressure fighter in this fight. There were very few occasions where he was actually put on the back foot for more than a second or two. And did just like against RDA, like an incredible job of standing his ground, changing angle, and then continuing to press forward. And when he was, like, quote unquote retreating, he was doing it laterally. He wasn't backing up and letting Colby run after him and build momentum.
I don't know if he was pressuring so much as he was just maintaining what he saw as his optimal range most of the time. Because he never got outside the, very rarely got outside the moat. And yeah, he just, as you said, he never backed up in straight lines. He always circled off. And yeah, he just kept it there pretty much the whole time. Even when
Colby stung him, you know, he would take a step off to the side, but he would still be right there on the edge of range. Like, he knew it was in his best interest not to show Colby a retreat. But I don't know. I still think, like, yeah, maybe if he had done him at the end of the round or something. To me, if he goes in for a clinch when Colby's back is to the fence, more opportunistically perhaps, even just as the fight goes on and Colby is more and more put on the back foot, then if that's a stalemate, to me it favors Usman. Like, if he gets Covington's back to the fence and they clinch up, he's got the chance to hit him in the body. He's holding him there. He's making Covington fight to get away from him, and Covington is just nowhere near the clinch wrestler that Usman is. So
yeah, you're probably not like. It probably would have been worth it for a few, especially those times where he had backed him up to the cage. It might have been worth it. I mean, especially because I think, like, both of these guys, incredibly mentally tough, but I do think that if he had gotten out wrestled, it would have made Covington quite mad.
Yes.
Like, more mad than getting punched in the face would.
Yes, I agree. You know, he's had that fight before where he gets punched, and trades punches nonstop. So, like, he's never been out wrestled. I think Usman's, like, the guy to do it. If they ever end up rematching, then that should happen. But until then, I will just hold in my mind the image of Colby frustratedly taking his gloves off and then literally running back to the dressing room. I will hold that image in my mind, and I will cherish it. All right, well, that's 26 and a half minutes about the main event, but it was a fantastic and fascinating fight. More things about which we were wrong coming up. Namely, Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway. We were not wrong, however, about Alexander Volkanovski being a fucking genius when it comes to finding and executing the right game plan. So speaking of discipline, we will be hitting that and the women's bantamweight title fight between Amanda Nunes and Germaine de Randamie and whatever else interests us from UFC 245 after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are still talking about UFC 245. The co-main event, Alexander Volkanovski defeated, I almost want to say, dominated Max Holloway to take his featherweight title and make it his own. Now, normally when we say dominated, we mean like a fight in which the person was crushed and had no moments or whatever. This was that wasn't the case. You know, Max Holloway, he landed his shots. He had his moments. It still was a kind of domination to me, because a fight in which Max Holloway has moments is not a Max Holloway fight. You know, this was as much Max Holloway being dominated as he was way back when he fought Conor McGregor. Because if you can beat Max Holloway in such a way that he never gets his game going, that his volume never jumps up, that he never gets you skittering backwards on the back foot, running away from combinations that just don't stop, that's not Max Holloway's fight. You have successfully prevented him from doing the thing that allows him to beat everyone else. And that's what Alexander Volkanovski did. He shut Max Holloway out of ever building momentum, and without momentum, Max Holloway is just a pretty good striker. So, your thoughts, Phil?
So we were saying about how smart Volkanovski is, and yeah, I'm pretty willing to say he's probably the smartest fighter in the sport right now. I would put him at the top of my, I don't know, neuron for neuron list. This was an amazing performance, and again, like one where I didn't. We spoke a bit about how Volkanovski would have to win if he won this fight, and again, we didn't really capture enough of the elements of how he would be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, you know, he was able to put together an approach that I just couldn't see coming. And in retrospect, you look at it and you're like, wow, no, they figured Max out.
Mm-hmm.
They really knew how to get to him. Like both him and his team. And obviously, you know, City Kickboxing has got to be the gym of the year for anyone who's scoring those kind of things.
It's City Kickboxing or it's Fortis MMA.
Yep. And I mean, I don't think it was domination. I think it's I like the Poirier fight. I think it's one where it was actually a pretty close fight. I think if you were really determined, I think you could probably even find a Holloway card in there, and it wouldn't be completely insane. I think you could give him like 1, 4, and 5.
I guess if you really just think leg kicks don't count.
I mean, he landed a lot of clean shots, I think, in the first and fifth. Maybe not so much in the fourth, but, you know, it's one of those ones where I'd have to watch it a bit. But I didn't think... But also, you know, just from a pure probabilistic stance, it's one of those things where, like, if you win a really clean round in a fight, you will become that much more likely that you are going to win the fight as a whole.
Mm.
And Volkanovski won the only clean rounds in this fight.
Mm-hmm. He landed more volume than Max Holloway.
Mm-hmm.
When has that happened, other than Max Holloway's fight with McGregor? The Dustin Poirier fight, I'm pretty sure he outpaced Poirier.
Yep. So, what were the keys to this fight? So I think, you know, we talked about pushing Holloway back with combinations, and that was definitely part of it. Volkanovski had figured out a lot of, like, ways, and you saw him practicing them before the fight. He'd figured out a lot of ways to close distance, to keep his hands going, and then to get back out without, you know, compromising his defense. And we kind of called that out. But the other thing which obviously, like, turned this fight around was the leg kicks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when we talk about this, we have to think about what we've meant when we've talked about things like granularity in the past and why Holloway is a great fighter and how that could have been turned around on him. Because the story of why Holloway beat Jose Aldo, for example, was that he was able to throw non-committal strikes to eventually draw out Aldo's reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And he could build off strikes which were, you know, low risk, low reward, until he could force Aldo into checkmate positions. In this fight, the question became, like, from a sort of from that kind of probabilistic sense, what if Holloway just can't throw that jab because you're going to throw something that trades with it?
Right.
And it was remarkably similar to Keita Moicano in that sense, in that Holloway was able to beat Aldo, for example, because his jab has less commitment on it. We talked a lot about how Aldo throws everything at full power. Holloway's problem is increasingly becoming that you can reach the other. You can be at the other end of the spectrum, where people can simply try and trade with you, and they're going to out damage you. So he was ready to probe and then pull back, over his feet and strike. And Volkanovski was just happy to either trade his leg kick with the jab, counter the leg kick with the jab, or chase Holloway down on the retreat and leg kick him. And all three of those things just meant that suddenly the one piece of Holloway's game that he uses to initiate everything became too much of a risk, because he simply he didn't have an option to throw that was scary enough to dissuade Volkanovski.
Right. Yeah. I think, man, how even to jump into this? I mean, I think that there were a couple of things that we've seen from Max Holloway in the past. Like, I think we've kind of known for a while that he's not good at checking leg kicks. That he's not great when he's pushed onto the retreat. That, everyone who sort of retreats in a hurried fashion leaves their legs behind. And we certainly knew that he's not like the hardest puncher in the world, that he is a building volume striker. I think, like, how should we approach discussing how Volkanovski got that to work? I mean, I think the big thing to say is that he just understood that, he could afford to, because I don't even see it as a lot of exchanges. I don't think there were a lot of occasions where he really had to trade the low kick for Holloway's jab. I think he really, like, intelligently figured out when that jab was going to be coming and just killed it. Holloway didn't really land his jab very often, very cleanly, until the later rounds of the fight, when he basically had to make an agreement with himself that he was going to eat the low kick to get the jab going, because without it, his game didn't function. So, like, again, I think this was an example of Volkanovski showing off some seriously underrated footwork, and phenomenal management of distance, but also Volkanovski feinting and confusing the timing of his opponent too. Because there were a lot of moments here where Max Holloway might have thrown the jab, might have just poured it on. It's similarly to when Jose Aldo fought Volkanovski. Like, he would have probably been better served to do, well, essentially what Aldo did to Marlon Moraes, which is just like, don't care if you get it right, just throw. That's your way to beating this guy. But even from the very beginning of the fight, like, Volkanovski was not getting touched by that jab. He had Holloway completely unsure of when he could throw it, even before his legs were totally wrecked by those kicks. So, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that changes your conception of the matchup at all or anything, but.
No, I mean, that was the, so what I was mentioning was kind of the offensive part of the puzzle, but, like, the defensive one, his distance management was just amazing. When he was retreating, he was generally getting off to one side. He was using, like, head movement and a high guard, and he was constantly coming back with strikes, including, he wasn't just low kicking, he was punching into low kicks, he was low kicking into punches.
He kicks moving backwards, he kicks moving forwards. Like, the man is an exceptionally well balanced, well positioned fighter. He is always ready to let basically any weapon go. To me, the thing about Volkanovski that's impressive, he's a great athlete. He's got a really cool like process where all the pieces of his game click together. He's got a great ability, obviously, to strategize and game plan, or at least to stick to the strategy and game plans devised by his coaches. But like, he's just technically a good striker, you know? He's got really good kickboxing technique. That's the thing that really jumps out to me here is like, I don't know, the game plan is brilliant, but honestly, I'm not sure if somebody without this level of striking skill could have executed it unless they had maybe like a much bigger physical advantage somewhere else. But I remember last week, discussing the Volkanovski-Aldo fight with, Danny Martin and Sriram, whose last name I'm always afraid to try to pronounce out loud, of the Vaping Scooter Gang. And I think I said then, like, Volkanovski is a better counterpuncher than Max Holloway, at least if this fight was anything to go on. And then I believe last week on our show I sort of hedged that a bit. But, like, watch this fight. He's a better counterpuncher than Max Holloway. He can sting Max Holloway coming in, not just countering the jab with the kicks, but also getting his head offline and landing the left hook, or landing the overhand right as Holloway comes in over the jab. And meanwhile, when put on the back foot himself, Holloway doesn't really have those options. Like, I don't know, it was this very strange feeling of seeing Max Holloway get technically shut out of a fight as well as out-strategized.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned that Holloway was the deeper striker, and this did not look like the case.
Right. Yeah.
This was like, it didn't have the same crazy, it didn't have the same like crazy stakes, and the same like odds behind it, but this is one of the best like coming out parties for a fighter I can think of since like Dillashaw versus Barao.
Sure.
Where you suddenly look at this guy and you're like, wow, he looks like the future.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to disagree. Incredible performance. One more thing I guess I kind of want to discuss. I've been thinking about this ever since I saw the tweet. But our dear friend, or depending on like whether or not Stephen Thompson is fighting our sworn enemy, Luca Bordone, he tweeted a little while ago, and he has shared this sentiment other times as well, that the low leg kick, the calf kick in MMA is a gimmick technique, because there's a reason they don't do it in Muay Thai, because everyone checks. And if you try to just kick someone in their planted calf and they're ready to check you, you are getting fucked up. Your chin is losing to theirs. Do you think, like, would it be worthwhile for Max Holloway to just practice checking kicks? Like, how fundamentally different would this matchup have been if he just had a good defensive response? Because, again, this is sort of like Colby eating Usman's body shots, you know? Like, oh, it was a tremendous adjustment. It completely changed the momentum of the fight. But, like, the other thing is, like, he just didn't have an answer to it. And I do always think, like, there's some angle from which that's a little embarrassing as a pro fighter to just, like, literally not have a trained defense to a certain technique. And, like, that was Max Holloway in this fight. He just doesn't check low kicks. How worthwhile do you think is it for MMA fighters to invest a lot more time in practicing checking kicks?
I mean, yeah, there's just the question that, you know, you have to invest time in lots of other things as well, unfortunately.
Right.
But MMA is just super hard to be consistently defensively good at in any phase. But yeah, I think both of the examples of those guys, the answer is clearly like they were just confident that they could tank it.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I remember being specifically shocked at when Covington fought RDA, is that he absorbed a shocking amount of body punishment and just seemed to walk through it. And clearly Usman just hits incredibly hard.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because RDA is a very good body puncher and a very good, like,
knee thrower.
You know, exactly. He hurts in the clinch.
Uh-huh.
And whilst Covington, those shots were hurting him, he was, it wasn't the same as when Usman landed one shot to the body.
Yeah.
So yeah, similarly, I think Holloway just thought, well, my solution to getting kicked in the leg is I'm just going to throw combinations when they're in that range, and
usually it works.
Yeah, and Volkanovski didn't stay in that range; he was back out again, and B was able to just outpunch Holloway in there.
Mm-hmm. And even when Holloway did start to have little moments of success and started to up the aggression, like again, I mentioned discipline coming into the segment, but like a lot of fighters just don't have the discipline to stick to the tactic that works, and to continually remold that tactic to answer the solutions the opponent comes up with for it. And like, I guess in this case, another parallel between Volkanovski and Usman is that both of them found something that worked or came into the fight prepared with something that they knew would work and continually found new ways to keep it working as the fight went on. So yeah, Volkanovski, incredibly technical, striking performance in which he basically had, like as Greg Jackson would say, he had a read on all of the key nodes. A word that I hate saying, which is why I always blame Greg Jackson for it before I say it. But he had a read on all of these like points at which Max Holloway's game either blooms or if the bud essentially of Max Holloway's game. And he had all of these solutions and all of these different ways of using those solutions to prevent Max Holloway from ever successfully adjusting. Beautiful performance. Absolutely beautiful. The man is a fucking fighting genius. He's, I'm just really like, it sucks to see Max Holloway lose, but again, just like when Holloway beat Aldo, like to see someone just really show up and do something incredible and unexpected to get that victory, I just feel kind of cool with it. It feels like a good ending to the story. That being said, do you want to see an immediate rematch? Or not?
I don't really mind, I've got to say.
I would like to see it.
You want to see it?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I suppose they go. I don't know who else is in line at featherweight.
Right.
Is it just Yair? Like.
Oh God. No, I think it's
Yair and Zabit, right?
I guess, yeah. Other people are saying winner of Korean Zombie, Frankie Edgar.
Not. Okay, as long as it's
right.
Korean Zombie, I can feasibly see it. But please not Frankie Edgar.
Although, I don't know, Edgar Volkanovski would be a good fight. I mean, I would enjoy watching that.
I just feel like it's a waste of time.
Yeah, but also, like, if Korean Zombie gets it, he just got knocked out by Yair, so... That's why I feel like an immediate rematch is okay. If somebody else gets the title shot, then I would happily watch like Max Holloway, do Zabit a favor and teach him all the lessons he was going to learn anyway. If he did end up fighting Max for the belt, even in a 3-round fight, I think that's a terrible matchup for him. But I don't know. I don't think there's any like contender screaming for a shot right now. Volkanovski was the guy, so I would like to see what Max can do different and see this fight run back. Like as you said, it certainly wasn't. I said it. I wanted to sort of give some nuance to the idea of a domination because he really did just prevent Holloway's whole process from functioning. But it wasn't so wide a fight that Holloway didn't like win 2 rounds.
Yeah, and but it is just the fact that it feels like Holloway was always the guy sort of coming up, and now it feels like people have stuck wedges into his game and they're opening it wider and wider. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not particularly keen on an immediate rematch, because I think Holloway needs to go back and think.
Okay, that's fair too. Yeah, that's fair.
I'm not sure if I want to see him like soaking up more damage in the short term.
Sure, and maybe not even give him Zabit, because that's a fight where I think his normal style is so well tuned. It makes so much sense to just easily beat that. Give him someone like less dangerous but more challenging to maybe try out some new ideas. I wouldn't mind that either. I'm excited to see what happens in the Volkanovski era. I feel very optimistic about the featherweight division. I had my eye on Volkanovski since he came to the UFC, and like he has far exceeded even my most cautious high expectations, and good shit. That's it for UFC 245. When we come back, we are going to look ahead to the main event and co-main event of next week's card, those being Frankie Edgar versus Chan Sung Jung and Volkan Oezdemir versus Alexander Rakic after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are one or two of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
Okay, welcome back to Heavy Hands. We are here talking about UFC, whatever it is. Oh, it's happening in South Korea. That's kind of interesting. This is Frankie Edgar versus the Korean Zombie. And we're going to cover that, and the co-main, we're going to make it a lot quicker and less in-depth than our UFC 245 breakdowns. But let's go ahead and jump in on the main event. Frankie Edgar versus Chan Sung Jung. And I don't know, how do you feel about Frankie Edgar right now, Phil? He's 38 years old.
I'm feeling it's been a while since we've seen him hurt really horribly badly by an uppercut. And it's about that time.
Yeah, that feels about right. Like, given all the uppercuts he ate from Max Holloway, who is just not a one-punch knockout kind of hitter, Korean Zombie definitely seems to have that opportunity. That being said, like, how good is Korean Zombie's takedown defense? And is he actually a good enough grappler from his back, or good enough creator of scrambles to beat Frankie Edgar if Edgar can get him down? But first one first. How likely do you think it is that Edgar can get Korean Zombie off his feet?
I think that in a lot of ways, Korean Zombie's style might actually be kind of built to beat people like Edgar.
Mm.
And the fighters he's been going up against lately are sort of a bit... They're actually like easier style matchups, if perhaps, less crafty and determined than Frankie Edgar is. At least on the feet. I think the takedown defense is basically the takedown defense is basically the key question we got to ask here. But I think even Edgar's ability to close distance is going to be very, very, it's going to be something that's going to be pretty perilous for him in this fight, because a lot of if Chan Sung Jung is good at two things, it is countering lazy jabs and it is countering level changes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both of those two things are sort of what Edgar does. He tends to throw away that jab and then slip his head and come in with, the right hand, the knee tap, the body shot, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. I think that in the same way that we sort of thought of James Vick as having like a tall man style that was built to beat level change fighters, I think Korean Zombie is kind of like that as well. And the difference has been that he's mostly been fighting against big, powerful... he's been mostly been fighting against big, powerful strikers lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's going to be. I think it's going to be challenging for Edgar to come in. Basically,
I think I agree with that. I do think about there's only a couple types of fighters. It's easy to find similarities in style and approach. But lately, I have been thinking a lot about how a Frankie Edgar who is really reaching the end of his physical peak would look like. And I think he's already he's past that point. But Frankie Edgar is one of those guys who's just like Michael Bisping was able to have great moments at the end of his career. I think Frankie Edgar is such a pathologically hard worker such a focused and coachable fighter that obviously he's able to hold on to. He's able to hold on to something resembling his peak a lot longer than other people would. But the thought that keeps occurring to me, and this feels almost blasphemous, because I still do love and have respect for Frankie Edgar's game, is he's kind of just like Wilson Hayes, where like all the things really need to be functioning for Frankie Edgar to have any moments of big success. You know, he's not a killer as a striker on the feet, unless you're Chad Mendes. He just has a certain kind of like mechanicalness to his movement that he's never really gotten rid of. Like he's a rote fighter. He has a specific way that he puts his combinations together, a specific rhythm to the way that he moves. All of this sort of explaining why in their rematch, Jose Aldo was able to just interrupt him and pick him off and counter him over and over and over again. And Frankie could never figure out a way to stop that from happening. And that's because of the way that Frankie Edgar normally stops that from happening. This is why it didn't work against Jose, is by threatening a takedown. And the secret is, like Wilson Hayes, that neither the takedowns nor the punches are really all that much to worry about on their own. Like, Edgar is not the world's most powerful takedown artist. I think that is more true now than it ever was because he's less quick. What really works for Frankie Edgar, the cornerstone of his game has always been the interplay between those two phases. Like, to me, the knockout of Gray Maynard is the perfect example of who Frankie Edgar is as a fighter. Is someone who gets you to worry a little bit about one thing, and that allows him to get in on the other thing, and then he's always ready to switch off that to the first thing, and back and forth, and so on and so forth, until you just don't know what's coming, and your reactions are always a step behind. He's like a pace fighter who brilliantly plays his two key core skill sets off of each other. And Korean Zombie is not a fighter. I think you're right about this. His style, he does not have the style where he's unprepared for what might be coming at him. I don't think he's the kind of fighter whose game gets shut down merely by the threat of a takedown. He likes to stand there in front of you and wait to see what you're going to do. And that seems bad for Frankie because he wants you guessing and anticipating and pre-reacting to what he's going to do. And he wants you to really commit to defending one thing so he can get you with the other. And that is not Korean Zombie's fighting style. He is a real, genuine counterpuncher. And that, like, calmness and open vision makes it a lot easier, I think, for him to deal with the threat of a takedown and to come up with aggressive counters to that without doing it desperately, without like selling out on the uppercut because he knows he needs to hit it or else he's getting taken down. And that works particularly well in my mind against a guy like Frankie Edgar because, as I said, you don't really have to be too scared of each individual attack. Like, the punches probably aren't going to KO you. The takedown is probably not going to blast you off your feet if you're in a good stance and you're ready to dig an underhook or sprawl. So, yeah, it feels a little bit like the dynamic we talked about with Volkanovski dealing with Holloway's jab, where like if you just know you don't have to be that threatened by what might be coming your way, it's a lot easier to just come up with good counters for it and take that threat away.
Yeah, and I think the Korean Zombie can essentially. This is also a physical question that Korean Zombie can afford to, I think, ignore Edgar's level changes, and I think he probably will do that.
Yeah.
I think he will prioritize, the takedown over the hands until he knows what's coming because he's confident that he can take the punches. So I think that we basically, my prediction is that we see some kind of combination of the dynamics that we saw in Edgar versus Ortega and Zombie versus Bermudez. Those seem like two pretty common, like, I think, similar opponents, similar styles, and basically similar outcomes in that Bermudez really had a lot of success against Korean Zombie. He really, hit him a lot. And he's a bigger puncher than Edgar.
Uh-huh.
And he could not scare him off trying to intercept the level change.
Mm-hmm.
And so Korean Zombie he waited until it came and then knocked him the fuck out. So, and similarly, Ortega got hit with body shots, got hit with overhands, and then eventually Frankie just level changed into something which got him killed.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's kind of how I see it going. Like, Korean Zombie he's a veteran, but he's also still clearly, he seems to be in his physical prime, and he's just a bigger, stronger, more dangerous guy. But he can afford to take Edgar's offense, and Edgar can't afford to take his. So I got to pick like Korean Zombie by knockout, maybe like first or second round.
Yeah, that doesn't sound wrong to me. Okay. Well, how about the co-main event then? Volkan Oezdemir, Alexander Rakic. I think we both have the same main question regarding this matchup and one of these men in particular. Phil, should I let you present that question?
Is Alexander Rakic good?
No. Oh wait, we don't know. Actually, we're not sure yet. He's a light heavyweight, so no. But in context, kind of hard to say, right? Like as you sort of put it before, how much of a Johnny Walker is Alexander Rakic? How much is he just like a formless blob of athletic ability that pitted against a well put together, still evolving fighter like Volkan Oezdemir will explode?
Yeah, because what we've basically seen from him is that he's just a dynamic kicker. That's kind of it. And other than that, he's had some fairly impressive performances, largely against people who are just going to expect to give him range, like, plodders like Barroso and Ledet, who have just been kind of carved up. And to a similar extent, an extremely washed Jimmy Manuwa.
Mm-hmm.
But that fight against Devin Clark, boy, that was bad.
Yeah.
That was real bad. This was just one where he got pushed into the fence and, like, did the whole, like, I'm Pettis, I'm a kicker, I need to get range, but I have no way of doing it kind of thing, and just got clobbered.
Yeah.
Repeatedly by the fence. And that seems like a pretty bad recipe against Oezdemir. And because Oezdemir is a good pressure fighter, he does not get out over his feet. He is not someone who is going to be easy to kick against. He is not just a boxer, he's a good kickboxer.
If you thought Devin Clark's left hook against the fence was a problem, Volkan Oezdemir can also do that, and then he, unlike Devin Clark, can continue doing it.
Yeah, I mean, we were watching that fight sort of, across the Atlantic together just a bit before this, and man, the finish to the Clark fight has to be one of the most comically awful I've seen recently. They both just get sort of carried along the octagon together, and then Rakic just flails backwards with his forearm, and Devin Clark goes stumbling into the fence and gets polished off. I mean, credit to his toughness and finishing instincts, but it is one of the more ugly finishes you're going to see.
I don't know why this image just popped into my head, but have you ever seen like the animatic, the pre-viz version of the lava lightsaber fight from Revenge of the Sith? Where like it's not.
I don't think I have.
It's not with all the CG. It's just like two really stiff looking models of the people fighting as this big platform just sort of zooms down a lava channel. That's sort of what it looked like. Just like two really stiff, awkwardly positioned people just sort of like skating along. Neither of them really seeming to intend to be moving. They're just moving. Yeah, really bad. Like Rakic misses a kick, and then Devin Clark goes insane trying to run in after him and counter, and then like he blindly throws a back fist, not even a spinning back fist, but just a back fist off the same side he missed the kick with, and it like instantly kills Devin Clark. Yeah, I mean, not great. Very, very light heavyweight. I am still inclined to take that kind of performance from Rakic a lot better, as a much better sign than any of the losses or bad moments I've seen in the career of someone like Johnny Walker. Like, at the very least, we saw mental fortitude there that someone like Johnny Walker doesn't have. Rakic is not just a bully. He can be knocked down and like seriously hurt and get back up. He's obviously very well conditioned because he recovered insanely well after a knockdown that almost looked like a KO. And came back into the fight quite confidently and ended up getting a finish. So that at least is a good sign. But technically as a fighter, how much better is he than someone like Johnny Walker? I'm not entirely sure. I think he's got a more consistent sort of process. He's got really powerful kicks that he throws regularly, but he does seem to really struggle, sort of in the same way that I said with Ian Heinisch. Like, he doesn't have a lot of like setups or little nuanced connective pieces in his game. And so someone who's not scared of his power, someone who is, in fact, like a pretty determined, methodical pressure fighter like Oezdemir just seems like a really rough matchup. Like, unless he knocks Oezdemir out in a big exchange, something which is a lot less likely to happen against him than it is against Devin Clark, who's nobody's idea of a technical striker, then I just think he's probably going to get put against the fence. He's probably going to get his first few low kicks countered, and shit, I mean, Clark gave him trouble in the clinch. Oezdemir is much taller, probably equally strong, if not quite as quick and explosive. Oezdemir's got great boxing against cornered opponents, something that's only gotten better and better in his game. He had far more success than anyone else ever has against Dominic Reyes, putting him in those kinds of positions in a fight that was like very, very even right from first bell to last. It just seems like a bad matchup for Rakic to me.
Yeah, I got to agree. I think specifically, that point where he went skating along the fence against Clark and he just got clocked with a left hook.
Yeah.
Like, it says bad things. And I think, Oezdemir, he's been a surprising pleasure to watch, lately. He genuinely has improved. Like, the idea of him being like a one-round explosion fighter without a huge amount of explosion has sort of gone by the wayside. He's been a consistent, round-winning, functional, process-driven fighter, and he's been good to watch. So I think if Rakic can beat him in a meaningful way, that like one that doesn't necessarily, doesn't mean that he just hits him with one wacky kick exchange, or just clobber him with another weird spinning strike. If he can actually compete and beat him, I think that means that we have significantly underestimated him.
Oh, for sure.
I think that there is still, because this thing, there is still a chance that Rakic is or can be genuinely good.
Yeah, he's got the confidence, the composure that someone like Johnny Walker doesn't, but similar levels of like shocking power, and he's quick and explosive. Like, he has the makings of a good fighter. The question is he a good fighter yet?
Yep. And I can't pick that until I see it.
Right.
So Oezdemir, and I think possibly by finish.
Yeah. That sounds about right. Yeah, like I said, that Clark left hook is such a specific bad look for something that Oezdemir specifically does very well. Getting people to run into his hooking shots when they're pressed into the fence. He's also got the option of the clinch, and I already said all this. Oezdemir, just one last thing I want to say. I'm not sure, like, there's still a possibility that just terrible, embarrassing things will happen. Because, like, after the loss to Daniel Cormier, he did then go on to lose to Anthony Smith. But the fight with Dominic Reyes, like I said, was so even. I did think Reyes won that on the night. I still think he gets my nod if I were a judge. But it was such a good fight that essentially both guys are winners in my book. Both guys come out of it looking really good. And to me, it was like that was the big step forward for Volkan Oezdemir. It's like he had to have a second humiliation after the Cormier loss. It almost makes me think that Henry Hooft operates sort of like a J.K. Simmons in what's the movie called?
Whiplash.
In Whiplash. Yeah, where he's deliberately bringing up the option of quitting and like undermining people's confidence because he knows only the ones who are really deserving of his great striking skills are going to come through. And I do get the feeling that Oezdemir has kind of come through those two setbacks a significantly better fighter. Like much more composed, much more confident. It's like you get mopped by Daniel Cormier, which makes sense, and then you get crushed by Anthony Smith, which doesn't. And you can react to that in one of two ways. You know, you can be mentally broken and start to doubt yourself at every turn, or, I don't know, you can kind of approach it like you've been there, you've experienced loss and humiliation, and now you don't have to like be so desperate to get everyone out of there quickly. And to me, yeah, Uzdemir's last two fights, he looked really calm, really composed, very technical and consistent. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to wrap up by saying, I don't think I underestimated Volkan Uzdemir, but I think perhaps he was underestimating himself. And I am prepared to see a better Volkan Uzdemir going forward. And I like that because when he's on, he's really fun to watch.
I will say, I think Hooft has been trying to like make his commentary more positive, but his
heard the criticism.
His corner work more positive, but it's in such a stilted way. It's great to hear. Like
he's like, "You good?
Things are going well. We don't need to worry." This would freak the shit out of me.
Just talking about emotions in general is so unnatural for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't know how to do it when he's not castigating someone. I like Henry Hooft. I don't know. I find him sort of charming. Okay.
I mean, as the head coach of Team Evil, perhaps you shouldn't, but okay.
Sure, yeah, there's a good chance he's probably a terrible person, but from the outside, I still enjoy Henry Hooft. And I like what he does with those few fighters who do seem really... I mean, everyone who works with him does get better technique. It's just that they don't overcome any mental problems they may have brought in. And in fact, they seem to be exacerbated sometimes. So, but Uzdemir, I think, came out the other side of his own sort of quitting tendencies and looks like a much better fighter for it. And like Kamaru Usman, he still gets to benefit from working with one of the best striking coaches in the game. So looking forward to that fight, expecting an Uzdemir win, but I enjoy watching Uzdemir win these days. And that does it for this week's episode of Heavy Hands. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Let's see, before we wrap up, Phil, presumably you have a preview coming out with David for the upcoming card?
Yep. So we're just going to be talking, I think, about Edgar, Korean Zombie. Nothing else other than that.
Well, I am planning some sort of recap article to UFC 245, but my new rule. I am not going to mention that until it is actually in the hopper, ready to be published. So, hopefully it happens, but I don't want to disappoint you if it doesn't. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening. It's just so fun to do this show in the regularly scheduled format when the fights are good. And UFC 245 was such a great card. So many great storylines. So many great developing fighters' games. And of course the crushing loss of Jose Aldo. So really everything came together for the ideal Heavy Hands episode. I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Find us on social media, by the way. I am at Boxing Bush. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. Both of those, of course, on Twitter. You can find the preview Phil mentioned and my article, if I do publish it, on bloodyelbow.com. Make sure you check out the Heavy Hands Patreon because there is a bonus episode out this week. I sort of teased it at the top of the show, but we talked about a lot more of UFC 245's undercard than you heard on this episode. So you will get to hear our breakdown of Jermaine Geronimi versus Amanda Nunes and basically every other really compelling fight from there on down on the Patreon. And that's just $3 a month to get that and all of our other bonus episodes. Until next week, thanks for listening. And if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you better believe you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.